Well, I'm ready to begin if you are.
Okay.
Well, thank you for taking the time to do this. To begin, could you share just your name and a bit about your journey to becoming a monastic?
Sure. Namaste Khan. My name is Bhante Varrapanyo. I'm an American Buddhist monk. I've been ordained for 6 years. My teacher is a monk named Sayadaw Ashen Tamathara. He's a Vipassana meditation master, very well known in Thailand and also Myanmar. Been practicing meditation and Buddhism, attending retreats and learning with teachers for 10 years. And in 2018, I ordained. I was 20 when I started, and I'm 31 now. And the process of transformation is ongoing and continuing.
Thank you. So, in your understanding, who was the Buddha and what was his primary teaching?
Well, we can say that there is two Buddhas. There's a historical Buddha, and then there's the Buddha of the mind, or the Buddha of awakening. So both of those are important. The historical Buddha representing our historical self and our capacity historically as a person, as a self, to become enlightened, to see through the fog, so to speak. And the Buddha nature, the mind of the Buddha, is that awakened mind, which is of course free from self. So you can't say that that's somebody, and you can't say that that's not the Buddha. So the Buddha's primary teaching is what Buddhism is about, is to do good, to not do evil, and to purify the mind. And that's the path and practice of Buddhism.
What is the reason or the value of purifying the mind? Why devote one's life to that practice?
It's just better than not. There's a degree of happiness, there's a degree of freedom, there's a degree of joy or pleasure that we can experience being fixated on a worldly life or a materialistic life, and doing that well, which is doing good and not doing what's evil. And then there's an even greater degree of freedom and peacefulness and compassion and an ability to help others and to help ourselves when we start to do that work of cultivation or mind purification.
Can you share a little about what Theravada or Theravada Buddhism is and how it's distinct from other forms of Buddhism?
Well, really the distinctions between Theravada or Mahayana or Vajrayana, the three major schools, are basically cultural. And they use different forms, they use different methods, they use different instruments of teaching the teaching of the Buddha. So the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, doing good, not doing what's wrong, purifying the mind is shared with all traditions completely. They have different languages, different methodologies, different perspectives that they may employ, and different layers of Buddhist psychology that you may find in one but may not find in the other. But it still all comes down to the root of the Buddha's teaching on dukkha, on anatta, on no self, on anicca, impermanence. So all of that comes together in Buddhism, and it's a unique aspect of Buddhism that all these different traditions and forms share the same root teaching, and that they actually don't differ on that. Just differs in terms of Buddhist psychology that they employ, which is very refined and difficult to understand, and also the forms of practice or the ways of teachings that they employ.
So dukkha, or suffering as it's often translated, was one of the main focuses of the Buddha. And he explained that there are causes to suffering and a path to be free of suffering. Can you share in your understanding what dukkha or suffering is, and what the causes are, and how one finds freedom from that?
Yeah, to my knowledge and my experience, the dukkha is a kind of entrapment in ignorance. It's a lack of freedom. It's a lack of depth of peace. It's a lack of being fully satisfied. So, for example, we can say that we seek satisfaction as human beings in pleasure, and we also seek satisfaction in avoiding pain. And we've done that many, many, many times. And it's very clear that it doesn't work. So that even the experience of satisfaction and pleasure is unsatisfactory, in that it's temporary, and that it's impermanent. So the dukkha that the Buddha talked about is really this deep sense of a thirst, and I would say a thirst for freedom that is not being satiated by what we grasp onto. And the teaching that the Buddha gave us on dukkha is that the cause of it is that grasping, that seeking, that chasing, that holding on, and in a sense, a kind of illusory agency of choice that perpetuates itself through desire and through fear. So no grasping, no suffering. No desire, no fear, no suffering.
Can you expound a little on that illusory agent of choice and what that means?
Well, it's not something that I can speak about directly, but I can allude to it. So, for example, how much choice do you have in terms of being alive right now? And so you can give 1,000 answers to that, and you can give 1,000,000 justifications for those answers. But the fact is that, whether or not you are alive right now, or that your body is alive right now, is based on cause and conditions that you have no control over. So it's not so much a matter of philosophically discussing or exploring if we have free will, as much as it is a exploration of deep looking. And when we look deeply, we are not picking and choosing. So the teaching on the satipatthana, or the mindfulness of breathing, is about fixating our attention, or kind of grasping onto something that is so simple that you can't find a self in it. You can't find a chooser in it. And so the choice becomes something so simple, just to be mindful. And in making that choice, you can see slowly but surely, you can kind of see the impermanence of self in the choicelessness of just being aware. So along those lines,
So you said, in sharing about suffering and freedom, that if there's no grasping or no desire, there's no suffering. I think some people can grasp that intellectually, but still find difficulty in the act of not grasping, of not desiring, of letting go of those fixations. Can you share how someone can do that, or how that comes about, that one can actually experience that freedom?
Yeah, well, if we're poor and on the streets, okay, sure, we might want some money, we might want some gold, but what we would like to have is some rubies, some sapphires, some emeralds, some diamonds, gems, right? That's valuable. So in Buddhism, we have the triple gem, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So that's the historical Buddha and his teachings. That's the awakening mind. It's the Dhamma, which is the teachings of the Buddha, but oftentimes not understood correctly. The Dhamma is something that's conveyed to you, that reaches you, that transforms you, that guides you. So the Dhamma that the Buddha gave was the Dhamma of that situation at that time with that person. So it was an enlightened being speaking directly to a person that they were face to face with. Many records of the Dhamma are like that. So we take refuge in the teachings of the Buddha, but also the experience of being with and being around Dhamma teachers and getting access to the Dhamma itself. The ways and means of ungrasping, untangling, freeing, compassion, experiencing compassion. And then the Sangha. And all of these go together. It's a kind of a trifold jewel. And the Sangha is really traditionally, when we talk about, from a Western perspective and someone who's looking to make use of Buddhism to transform their life, we're talking about ordained monastics that, you're going to find at monasteries, hopefully. And then we're talking about kind of enlightened beings, people who are somewhat enlightened. Because we can't really determine much how enlightened someone is, just like how we can't determine much the skill level of LeBron James on an NBA basketball court, because we're not involved with it in that way. We never have been, so why would we wouldn't be able to determine that skill level. We have to actually rely on the ordained Sangha, or as close to that as we can get. So something my teacher emphasizes a lot is for people to try and ordain, for people to go and live at Buddhist temples, monasteries, to go and volunteer, to find a teacher, of course, is a classic trope. But we really have to have the mind of dana, of generosity, of giving, to have the opportunity to connect with a community. We think that our presence is inherently beneficial. It's kind of like an ego thing or an arrogance thing. But actually, what's beneficial is to use our presence to give, to share. And of course, following precepts and living virtuously empowers your capacity to share in a sustained and helpful way.
Thanks. Excuse me. So another question I have is, what is nirvana and what is samsara?
Well, we can say, I'll say that the samsara is the world of dreaming, being in a dream or a nightmare. Dreams and nightmares are, And nibbana is being in a world of wakefulness. And the world of wakefulness, we can say, the reality world, has the mark of selflessness or non-separation. It has the mark of impermanence, so that no thing is permanent in its thingness. Its thingness is just an appearance of impermanence. And it also has this mark of dukkha, or the unsatisfactoriness of anything in that world, making it not worthwhile to grasp onto. So it's a world of non-grasping and wakefulness, and non-discrimination, we can say, and an abiding in that. And the world of samsara is, this life that you deal with your traumas, with your fears, with your stories, with your character, with your identity, with this revolving door of birth and death.
I think a lot of that trauma and fear and challenges that people have revolves around a self, a sense of self, or feeling of I. And Buddhism often speaks about no self, as you mentioned, or selflessness. Can you share a little bit more about that? Because I think that's a teaching that a lot of people that aren't familiar with Buddhism have trouble with. There's a lot of fixation on the self. So to say there's no self, I think it's shocking to a lot of people.
Well, it gets into a kind of experimental and experiential realm. And to enter into that realm, much like to enter into the NBA or to enter into a specialized field of sciences, you have to sacrifice. You have to give your life. You have to give up your life to do that. So a good thing to watch out for, and it's not always going to work that way, because some people have liberating insights out of the blue, and some people have been training for a long time and don't basically have no insight or development. But you want to look at how much you've given yourself to understanding this. That's how interested you are in it. Have you gone to join meditation retreats? Have you given up your life to go live at a monastery? Have you tried to reach out to monks and nuns? Have you listened to a bunch of Dhamma talks? Have you sought out authorized teachers? Have you broken your back seeking for this ultimacy of experiential reality? Have you done that? And if you haven't, then you have to humble yourself and be more open to not being in charge and not being in authority on the mind, on the world, on reality. And when you do that, we can say, like Thich Nhat Hanh, we're at a Thich Nhat Hanh monastery right now, would say that these sunglasses are made up of non-sunglass elements, right? This body, which, I would say is myself, my me, my I, is made up of sunlight, of oxygen, of the moisture in the air, of the temperature. And if that temperature was different, this self or I would cease to exist completely. So it's heavy stuff, but it's also already like that. And a lot of times our motivations for, no self or enlightenment are a kind of escapism from our traumas, our fears, our difficulties. And, in some sense, it is an escape. It is a freedom from that. But it's something that you will cheat yourself out of realizing the depth of it if you don't give, if you don't sacrifice, if you don't renounce, if you don't live virtuously, if you don't get help from a community, from a Sangha.
Something I'm feeling into or recognizing as you're speaking is that people seek that escape from suffering or from unhappiness through something like enlightenment, and they try to avoid that suffering. But it seems that a lot of Buddhist teachings turn towards suffering, to acknowledge it, to look deeply into it, to try to understand it. Is that accurate? And if so, can you share a little about that?
Well, what I can share about this is something I've thought about before, and this is where we get into the experimental instead of just experiential aspect, and also this point of responsibility. So there's a saying that, oh, you went to become a monk, or oh, you went to live at a meditation center or something. You're trying to run away from your problems. You're running away from your life. But the truth of the matter is that wherever you are, that's where your life is. And that speaks to the kind of revolutionary quality of recognition of suffering, which is also the revolutionary quality of the recognition of nibbana, or the ending of suffering, or the cause of suffering. So none of it is formulaic. None of it's in a textbook. It's a revolution of the mind to see your suffering as it is now. And it's, for me as a Western monk and kind of a modern-facing monk, it's something I'm very aware of, where, okay, if I'm seeking this certain way of life, am I spiritually bypassing? Or am I actually taking on the responsibility of a revolution of the mind? And there's no revolution of the mind in isolation. It happens in community. And this is why it's very important that to ask these questions more deeply, we have to have some kind of contact with spiritual community. I don't know if that exactly answered your question.
I think so. It brings up many other questions too. But I guess one of the questions I really want to ask you as well is around this practice of mindfulness and meditation, sometimes used interchangeably, sometimes spoken about very distinctly. But what is the role of these awareness practices in overcoming suffering or gaining a deeper understanding of the nature of reality? And with that, how can someone that's new to that begin those practices or start on that path?
It's not it's not a very convenient answer. It's like starting a job that you have to do without pay. And so who wants to do that? Nobody. And that's who we are accessing when we practice mindfulness. We're accessing nobody. Because the thought forms of someone at some place in some situation having some kind of experience with some kind of past and some kind of future, this characterization of the I in a thought form is not the same as being mindful of the breath now. So this direct experience of being mindful of the breath now is an inroad to grasping or connecting to something that is already not based in a self-identity. Now, when we move more and more into that, we develop concentration. We may understand about ourselves a little bit more. We may learn how to relax the tension in the body. But the problem for us as human beings is that we're looking for a quick fix. We're looking for the cheeseburger. We're not looking for the growing our own vegetable garden. And that's something we have to wrestle with when finding the path. You have to really become aware, and this is what we become aware of in mindfulness meditation or in practicing meditation, whatever kind of meditation that it is how constantly this clinging, grasping mind, this habit energy, pulls us away into thought forms of self-identity and judgment and all this. That's why traditionally, and I really feel that we can, as practitioners, we can get a lot more success if we approach it in this way. The entry point into Buddhism is dana. It's giving, it's generosity, it's renunciation. And through that, we build a base of merit or benefits or blessings through doing good that we can then use to not do evil, to restrict our behavior that's oftentimes based in pleasure seeking or pain avoidance, to be more ethical, and then we regret less. And when we don't have regret, we can get deeper into the nature of mind that is actually quite profoundly peaceful, and it doesn't actually have anything to do with a separation, a self that's separate, which is already naturally apparent in everything. It's like a law of nature that this body is not separate from the environment in any realistic way. It's only in an arbitrary way or in a relative way, which is meant to be used for practical purposes, to help others, to do good, to not do evil, to plant wholesome seeds, to weed out the weeds, and to purify the mind if we're a Buddhist. It's not to be used for any other reason.